But it is, of course, time now for the press preview. Our first look at the front pages as they arrive. Time to see what's making the headlines with our guest this evening, the political journalist and broadcaster Theo Usherwood and the journalist and author Rachel Shabby. We'll be with them in just a second, but let's run you through the front pages that we have, beginning with The Mirror. Twister Terror, their top story, which speaks to victims of the tornado that hit Greater Manchester. Same story for the Daily Express, with a quote from a family affected by the tornado who say they were lucky to be alive. The overstretched state of the NHS has prompted two-thirds of doctors surveyed to feel moral distress. That's leading The Guardian. What, the Eye? Well, it's reporting that former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged his successor, Rishi Sunak, to get on with it when it comes to accelerating the UK's reliance on nuclear power. The FT hears that the US government has imposed sanctions on Turkish and Yemeni groups with alleged ties to Iranian-backed Houthi rebels. An exclusive leading the Mail, Home Office figures suggesting that the police give up on 4 crimes a minute. Similar story in The Telegraph, which reports that more than half of UK police forces are failing to properly investigate crime. The front of The Times, it's reporting a warning from a think tank which says underqualified civil servants are overpaid at the cost of more senior staff. And The Star tells us that nearly 3/4 of dogs will need to go on a diet after Christmas. Well done, Star. Just a reminder that by scanning the QR code you will be seeing on screen during the programme, you can have a look at those front pages of the papers in more depth whilst watching us. And as mentioned, we are joined tonight by Theo Usherwood and Rachel Shabby. Good to see you guys, and a very Merry Christmas. But I suppose not a particularly Merry Christmas for those in Stalybridge. This localised tornado, I mean, talk about a way to wake up. I mean, an absolute horror story, and thankfully, at least, you know, not more was lost as a result of this.
Gerrit and Lindsay Moody's Christmas and their children's Christmas has been completely ruined by Storm Gerrit. There's a photograph of them on the front of the Daily Mirror outside their home, and then an accompanying picture of the roof ripped off their house by this tornado. Wind speeds of up to 80 miles an hour, leaving 1,500 homes without power. I mean, these are scenes not usually, well, we don't witness these in the UK. They're perhaps more familiar with tornadoes in America, but they've had a lucky escape by all accounts, and they've obviously got severe damage to their home, but they're alive, they're well. Indeed. And it's a terrible story. I
mean, 80-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, obviously, the localised chaos in Stalybridge, one thing, Rachel. But just look, I mean, I was talking to you guys in the break about making my journey back from Scotland, from seeing my family, and you know, you had the A9 road from Perth upwards that was completely blocked. We had significant flooding on the east coast, blocking the train lines. I mean, it's been an absolute horror of a year when it comes to weather events like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that the climate emergency and global heating is making extreme weather events like this both more frequent and more intense. And as Theo says, we're starting to see these events happen more and more in the UK. The scale of the damage of this is horrifying, not just in Greater Manchester, but also, you know, up and down the country with these floods, with travel chaos, with power shortages, and looks set to continue for a few more days. But, you know, this is really a wake-up call, and it is devastating to think of all these families that have been so horribly affected by this storm over the last few days.
Theo, take us to the front of the Daily Mail, because this is an interesting one, because I think we mentioned we see it elsewhere in the Telegraph. Is this perhaps a freedom of information story? Police give up on 4 crimes a minute. What's this about?
It's a good story by the Mail. Well, it won't be particularly great reading for number 10, and I'll try and elaborate on that in a minute. But they've uncovered some figures which have shown that the number of inquiries closed by officers without identifying a suspect has gone up 250,000 year on year. Forces gave up on investigations into more than 2.3 million crimes in the year to June. And these include, the Mail is reporting, hundreds of thousands of violent offences and burglaries. And I just take you back to, well, the 2017 election, where did Theresa May really get punished when it came to austerity? It was on the issue of cutting police officers. Boris Johnson in 2019 came in with 3 promises to get Brexit done, build 40 new hospitals, and then concentrating on crime by promising to reintroduce those 20,000 new police officers. And here is a report card saying, on the front page of one of the most conservative supporting newspapers, saying, well, actually, when it comes down to the raw numbers, the Tory government, the police under the Tory government, is not doing particularly well. It's having to focus on the most serious crimes and just giving up on crimes that really matter to people. If you get your home broken into, it matters to you. You want the culprits to be caught, you want it properly investigated. But according to this, the police are just giving up.
I suppose the idea of zero tolerance on crimes is one for the birds. I wonder if, so too, the idea that the Conservatives are the party of law and order.
Yeah, well, I mean, they seem to have lost a lot of their, self-proclaimed titles, like the party of business, the party of strong economy, and lo and behold, the party of law and order is another one of them. And it is, I think, all just down to austerity cuts and people feeling the pinch in all kinds of ways, not just decimated public services and the cost of living, but also things like this, when it comes to just your regular local police force being out and about and visible in the streets, which is a big part of crime prevention, apart from anything else. It's just not happening in the way that it used to, and that is a result of cuts.
Let's talk politics. There's actually quite a few political stories around in the papers, and we'll begin with the iron. Whoever wants to take this one away can. Boris Johnson once again, that's my guy. Boris Johnson once again putting his size 10s in it and providing, I'm sure, some really well-meaning advice.
Taxi driving, yes.
Yeah, exactly. But this on this particular occasion over nuclear power.
Just to take you back to the war in Ukraine, obviously there was a heavy reliance, we still rely very heavily on gas from abroad. The real pressure was on, well, why are energy prices surging because of what's happening with Russia's invasion of Ukraine? And that's because we're not self-sufficient. And so the attention turns to how can we make ourselves more self-sufficient when it comes to having our own independent energy supply, and that is to build more nuclear. Now, the Eye have done, I think it's a good story, this, because what they've managed to get hold of is they've managed to get hold of these leaked papers which show that the Prime Minister, or the government rather, has missed deadline after deadline after deadline when it comes to building those power stations. They're always going to be opposed by local communities. It's difficult to do, but Rishi Sunak isn't doing it. And now, then they've gone and obviously rung up Boris Johnson and said, well, what do you make of your successes? What he's managed to do or not managed to do, and Boris Johnson has gone for him.
But I suppose if we're going to be charitable about this, I mean, isn't the greater failure that, Fukushima, Chernobyl live long in the memory? Of course they do. But actually, in general terms, nuclear energy is one of the safest, it's one of the cleanest, and the case has not been made by political leaders, I would suggest, of all political persuasions, that nuclear can be a significant part, not necessarily the totality of it, but a significant part of our energy security.
I would question that. I mean, nuclear is old, it is dirty, it takes a long time to come online.
That is true.
And it's very, very expensive. When you compare that to renewables, there's just no contest. Renewables have come online in such a quick and increasingly cost-effective way. It's just a no-brainer. And so for me, I think the real question isn't what are you not doing with nuclear, because that's a dead story. It's why have you not invested in renewables at the rate needed to meet your own net zero plans?
Onshore and offshore.
They won't. Well, the Tories won't do onshore wind farms.
Yeah.
They'll only do offshore wind farms, and of course there's been a huge amount of pressure about that. The lead-in time is the big issue. You remember that Nick Clegg, when of course he was Deputy Prime Minister in the coalition, turned around and said, well, actually, I'm not going... It takes 10 years to build a nuclear power station when it's something that I'm not going to countenance. And, of course, we then hit the war in Ukraine, energy prices go up, and questions are being asked about why we're not energy independent from Europe. And, of course, these decisions have to be made, and Boris Johnson is saying hurry up to Rishi Sunak. But in reality, if he was going to build those new nuclear power stations, we're not looking until 2030, 2035 for them to actually come online.
I mean, compare and contrast. My drive to the airport today takes me right through one of the biggest onshore wind farms in Scotland, and providing a significant amount of electricity. I want to kind of group together the next two stories, though, both in the front of the Telegraph. The first of those, that inheritance tax might be scrapped altogether. But on top of that, that the early general election is the worst kept secret in Westminster. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm going to gently suggest that the two might well be linked.
The inheritance tax one is all about playing to the base, because when you actually look at the numbers, this year it's forecast to raise £7 billion in revenue for the Treasury. And I just looked it up. Fewer than 4% of estates pay inheritance tax. So it's only it's the wealthiest that are paying inheritance tax, and it doesn't affect the vast majority of people. So the Tories are coming up with a policy that is going directly to their base to shore up their support.
A tax cut for the 1%? Yeah.
It may not be the 1%, the top 4%, and it's not a policy that actually goes beyond traditional Conservative voters. It might be popular, and of course there has been talk about cutting the headline rate from 40p to 20p, but actually many Conservative MPs, particularly those on the right, according to the Telegraph's Ian Duncan Smith, David Jones, Jacob Rees-Mogg, are all pressing the Prime Minister now to go much further and scrap it completely. But
Rachel, Emily Thornberry, of course, the Shadow Attorney General, is she stirring the pot, perhaps, when she's suggesting that an early general election is the worst kept secret? I mean, do you want to see one, or are you Brenda from Bristol? Oh, not another one.
I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, to be honest, because if you're the Tories and you're looking at the polls and they're awful, you're not going to say, bring it on. But I also don't quite agree that the inheritance tax thing is playing to the base, because, as you just said, look, the vast majority of people in this country are never going to earn enough or own enough to ever pay inheritance tax. It doesn't matter. But what does matter is this narrative of aspiration, of, oh, why are you taking away people's well-earned, hard-earned income? It's the aspirational aspect. And I think for the Tories, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to get Labour on ground that it's lily-livered about. It won't actually come out and say, we need to tax unearned income. We need to bring it in line with taxing income. That's one of the biggest problems we've got in this country. They won't say that. They want that fight with Labour, not to shore up their own support, but to depress Labour's.
Welcome back to the press preview. Both you guys, Theo and Rachel, still here with their selections from the papers. And Rachel, take us away on this one on the front of the FT. I think a significant story because of the way in which the Tehran-backed Houthis, as the headline said, have been operating and the significant effect that they are already having with their actions. Tell us more.
So the Houthis, they've launched a series of attacks against commercial vessels in the Red Sea. And it is significant. It affects quite a lot of the international trade that goes through that Red Sea. And they have said that they will carry on with these attacks as long as Israel's war on Gaza continues. Now, the US is trying to shore up support for a task force to deal with this. It's not having much luck. It's trying to slap sanctions on groups that it suspects are financing the Houthis, such as groups in Turkey and Yemen that it makes allegations against, and, of course, Iran. It wants to corral an international task force, but it can't get one. And the reason it can't get one is because most of those countries do not agree with the US policy on Gaza. And also they know that their own populations, countries like Italy, countries like Spain, their populations are vastly opposed to Israel's brutal assault on Gaza and are calling for a ceasefire. And I think there is a wider context here, which is the US trying to corral support for something for which there is no support internationally. Globally, people are absolutely horrified by what is going on in Gaza. And it's not just the brutal civilian deaths, but it's what Israel is now saying it wants to happen, which is ethnic cleansing. It's talking about, we had the Israeli foreign minister just the other day on Israeli TV asking countries to take Gazans, to take them out of Gaza. It is openly talking about transfer. It's the logical conclusion to Israel of what it's done in Gaza, which is made it uninhabitable. You've seen that. Sky's own coverage has seen that. True. And now we're talking about forced transfer. So the fact that Biden is responding to that scale of danger for Palestinians in Gaza in this way is so out of step with how most people are feeling.
Indeed, but I do wonder whether we might see opinion change if the Red Sea attacks are stepped up and we see significant cost rises on the goods that are flowing through those particular channels. We've not got much time, though, Theo, so I want to move us on to another remarkable story. And this is all from well, explain it for us, but it's abandoned Blair government ideas. And again, on the front page of the FT, we have the story that he wanted a deal to share the Parthenon marbles, and it gets better.
So there are three stories that have come out of state-released papers which go back to the Blair years. The first is that Blair wanted to, or his advisors wanted to come up with an idea or a sharing agreement when it comes to the Parthenon marbles with Greece back in 2003, accusing the British Museum of being a blinkered intransigence over the contested treasures. Now, of course, this is a topic that's been it's come up recently because, of course, the Greek Prime Minister visited this country and was accused by Rishi Sunak of grandstanding because he wanted to talk about the marbles in particular, and Rishi Sunak cancelled a meeting with the Greek PM. Now, of course, Tony Blair obviously was being a bit more open-minded and was looking to put pressure on the British Museum to find some sort of loan agreement. The other story that's come out of these papers is that he looked at plans...
On the front of The Guardian, I think.
Front of The Guardian,
yeah.
yes. Looked at plans to offshore asylum applications to the Scottish island, the island of Mull.
Home of the popular kids' show Balamory. Yeah, that's...
and then removing those asylum applications to safe havens in third countries such as Turkey, South Africa and Kenya. Now, it should be said that the Tory Deputy Chairman, if I've got this right, Lee Anderson, came up with a very similar idea recently, that they should be, their applications, asylum applications, should be processed in Orkney. Lee Anderson, of course, represents the constituency of Ashfield in that sort of heartland, red wall seat.
Was that supposed to try and deter people? I mean, Orkney's lovely, frankly. Sorry. I'm going to stick up for the Arcadians. I mean, Rachel, what are you thinking? We've only got a minute left, so I just want to bring you in on this. Anyway, I bet you're not surprised by that at all.
No, not remotely, because Tony Blair squandered an opportunity to actually push back on these false narratives that immigration is in any way a problem. The only people for whom asylum seekers is a problem is the asylum seekers themselves, who are fleeing persecution and war. It doesn't surprise me that Tony Blair had this as a nuclear option, because he was one of the worst prime ministers on asylum. Some of the most draconian measures against asylum seekers were introduced under Tony Blair. So no big surprises there.
Yeah, and a reminder, because we've often said on this programme when I've been presenting that the right had not made that economic case for migration. The same could also be said of Labour. Look, thank you for your selections.